What's going on, everybody? Gar Hoover here, and today we're going to be going through my track Grand on the PO-33. Grand came about from just a simple chord progression I wrote on the piano. I thought it sounded really good, and it sort of spoke for itself. It didn't really need a melody or anything, and so it's not really a complicated track. It just has a lot of textures and things going on with it, and I just want to walk through that track with you guys today. If you have yet to watch this track, you can check it out up here. Also, if you haven't gotten the samples for this track, they're in the description below. Just download them for free and you can use them however you want. That being said, let's get started on this track. Okay, so first off, let's start by looking at some samples. I just have this bass note that rings out. It sounds pretty good. It's a sampled bass from Contact. Then we've got my drums. You can hear I've also got some rocks in there. I've got a same duplicate of that drum kit in this section down here in bank 9 and 13. Not really anything too crazy. Layer my drums as always. I used rocks and kind of just jingled them around and recorded them into my laptop mic to get those textures just for more lo-fi sounds. Here are the piano chords I used, all 5 of them. And what I did is I ended up trimming them all so that they fit into each one of those first 5 buttons, because the PO-33 kind of chops them up randomly sometimes if you're just putting chords in. So that's what I did for that. And then finally we've got the water sounds, and I recorded these at Grand Lake here in Colorado, and that's kind of why I named the song Grand. And the water sounds really just add that additional lo-fi texture we're looking for. So that's it for the samples. Alrighty, so now it's time to take a look at the intro of the track. Let's just take a listen to it real quick. Cool, so now you guys kind of have an idea of what that sounds like. This first section, as you can tell, kind of fades in, but before we even get into that, I just want to talk about the chords, because the chords go through the entire song for the most part, and this chord progression is pretty simple, really. So let's just walk through that real quick. First chord is on the first step. You can hear it's kind of muted because there's that filter on it, and then we have one on the 7th step of the sequence, and then it's the same thing, first step, 7th step for that second section. And here, I'll just point it out for you. So that's kind of the rhythm we've got going on throughout the entire song. And you can hear that low pass filter starting to open up more and more with each one of these patterns. Let me just turn them up actually, so we'll go to filter and make it so there's no filter whatsoever, because you can already tell I'm already riding that filter throughout each one of these patterns. And what I did was I hit play, held down right, and I brought down the filter and slowly brought it up throughout the entire thing. So it was recording in the filter, and it helps make it sound like it's fading in, making a smooth transition into the rest of the track. So now let's take a look at the water sounds, because I also happen to fade those in. So we trigger it on the first step of that first sequence, and you can hear it's a pretty long sample. So in the second pattern, I actually have no sample being triggered. It's long enough to go through 2 patterns, and you'll hear that right here. It's just continuing on. No step, nothing's being triggered. And then it continues on in the second iteration of that beginning of the chord progression, where it's starting to open up more, and I'm holding down right and bringing in that filter, as I had mentioned, that low pass filter. And it's creating more energy for this song to begin. So now let's take a look at the rocks. I have those once again on my drum bank. So you can see I've got one on the first step, and then the 5th step and the 13th step. And the 5th and the 13th behave like a snare almost. So no matter what pattern I have with these rocks, I always have one on the 5 and the 13 behaving as a snare. And we have alterations. So in the first pattern we have one on the first step, 5, 13, and then the second pattern we have 5th step, nothing on the first, 9, and then 13. And then it goes back through again in that same pattern. It really does kind of add a little intrigue. It makes it sound random, but at the same time they're kind of in sync with everything. And you can hear these. The PO-33 did a pretty good job at cutting them where they're actually hitting. And so it keeps it very precise, but also in a way not necessarily fully on beat, which is really what we're looking for in a lo-fi track. This is kind of what the rhythms sound like. So that 11 step is kind of behaving like the snare, and then the other ones are kind of adding those additional textures to it. And these rock samples are also being manipulated by the filter in the same way as all the other sounds for this section. So it sounds like a total filter is being used over all the tracks. So now let's take a look at this next section, which isn't that different. You can hear everything's opened up. The only major difference, as you can tell, is that hi-hat. But that hi-hat's not being triggered on the same track as the rocks. We have 3 sounds we're using, which means we can use one more available, and that's what we're doing with the hi-hat. We have that copied of the drums, and we just have kind of this shaker hi-hat going down the first row, which keeps it on that clean quarter note. So it helps keep things steady, lets us know that the song's building a little bit more, adds energy and some drive to it. And then it's going to transition into what will be the verse, which we're going to look at next. Great, so now let's take a look at what the verses sound like. Let me just play it for you real quick. Alright, and that's pretty much it. That just loops around and it sounds pretty great. Now let's take a look at the piano. Chord progression is the exact same. It's that same rhythm through it and then goes to that jazzy chord that's technically out of its key, modulating. It's kind of fun. But it's just the same progression. Nothing new there. And same with the rocks. But I moved the rocks down to drum bank 13. They're doing the same thing. And I'm pointing them out here. 1, 5, 13, and then 5, 9, 13. That standard rhythm that we had already had. Just adding that texture because we've lost the waves for this section. But now let's take a look at the actual drums because they're very lo-fi-ish. So we have the kicks that are in sync with the chord progression that hit on the 1 and the 7. But we also hear it hitting on the 12 right before the snare. That duk. That's classic lo-fi vibes. So if you're looking for lo-fi, having it go from the kick right into the snare like that's perfect. And any other steps that are empty within the vertical first row and the vertical third row, I just fill them in with the shaker. And you'll hear that here. And that helps us keep that 8th note rhythm instead of being super high energy. That first vertical row and that third vertical row. And other than that kick that's on the 12, most of it's all staying within that realm. But we hear there's a little bit different rhythm in this final pattern. We've got an additional kick on the 8, and then we've got the additional kick on the 12, but then we have one on the 14. So we have 2 kicks around that snare hit, that final snare hit, and that sounds really good. And then we have a snare hit that's a little bit different sounding, less rim shot-ish, and a little bit deeper, fuller snare, and that's kind of serving as a transition. It either is going to loop around or transition into the next section. And as you know, I always love to layer my samples. You can hear my kicks are layered, and my snares also have the shaker layered on top. Same thing, and then there we just have the plain simple shaker. And that means we don't need 2 tracks for drums. We can just use 1. And that being said, now let's take a look at the bass. So the bass helps keep the groove tight. It really drives this song if we actually think about it because the chords stay the same, but the bass is really dynamic. It tends to change from the verse to the chorus and into that bridge kind of section. So the bass for the verses is following the chords and hitting at the same time. We've got hitting on the first step and then the 7th step. And it's just playing the root notes of the chords just to add that additional foundation. But I will say this much, that first note, it gets cut off by the snare. And how I do that is you hold down the note and you twist the right knob and you can see it provides numbers. Now it's going to only last the length of 4 steps. And then after that, it gets cut off. And it gets cut off by the snare and it helps keep things feeling tight. And the same thing happens with this other note. It goes from step 7 all the way to step 12 and then gets cut off by that next snare on 13. So it's really not too crazy. We're playing it safe with the root notes because we know that the chorus is going to get a little bit more interesting. And so the same thing goes for the second pattern. It follows the chords and the bass line. And then the final pattern, it gets a little bit more interesting there. We hear that additional hit in there that follows along with the kicks. It still gets cut off by the snare, but then we hear this octave jump on 7 and then jumping down to the 8th step and doing that standard bass kind of octave jump vibe that goes along with the kicks. Everything's staying in sync and sounds really tight. And that carries out until you get to the snare hit on 13, and then it gets cut off in the same way. So I have that going for 5 steps total and then getting cut off by the snare on 13, but it adds that energy, adds that groove, even if it's a simple bass line, by having it interacting with the kick and the snare. So it keeps it all very tight and sounding good. That being said, now let's take a look at the chorus. Alrighty, time for the chorus. Now this is probably the highest energy section, but also the most complicated. It has some good stuff going on. Alright, so let's just cover right off the bat the things that are the same, starting with the chord progression. It's the exact same as it's been throughout the whole song so far. And that's a big part actually about lo-fi, is just having a consistency that goes throughout the entire song. There's no drama or tension. It tries to stay pretty consistent the whole time, carrying a certain vibe throughout all of it. But now let's just take a look at the drums, because unlike the chords, the drums do have some dynamics that take place, especially in the chorus. So what we've got going on here is we got shakers on vertical rows 2 and 4 and hi-hats on vertical rows 1 and 3. But we still have kicks and things going on. We've got the kick on 1 and 7 as we've had, which is pretty common throughout the entire song, adds that consistency. But we also have a kick here on 12, but the kick here on 12 is a different kick technically, as it has the layered shaker. And this bottom row that I made has hi-hat sounds instead of shaker sounds to it. So you can hear there's a distinct tonality between the two different drum kits that I imported in, though they're in the same drum bank. So once again, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to layer your hi-hats or shakers on your samples. It makes it so much easier in the long run. So now let's just take a look at this rhythm we have going. So that first vertical row, it has that quieter sounding kick because it has the hi-hat, which isn't as bright, and the same with the third vertical row. And the second vertical row and the fourth vertical row have the shaker, which is a little bit brighter sounding and has more presence. And you can hear that in that kick that has the shaker layered on it. It almost sounds brighter. It sounds like a different kick. And that adds that alternating feel to it, especially when we incorporate the swing into all of this. Man, it really adds that groove to it all. Because normally when people are playing this on a normal drum kit, you're varying in your velocity that you're hitting the hi-hat to provide that groove. But here we're able to use two different sounds, the hi-hat and the shaker. So it's pretty much the same for that second progression. Let's look to the third one with the chord change that's interesting. Alright, we're hearing some stuff that's a little bit different already. We have those two snare hits. Now technically they're the same snare, but they have different items layered on top. We've got the hi-hat first and then the shaker second. You really can't even hear the difference between the two, but maybe there's some subtlety there. I've never really caught it, but just to stay consistent, I decided to try and just add it, because maybe you can catch it, maybe you can't, but I honestly barely can. But it still is just keeping with the theory that we have going on here. So you can hear, I didn't really hear much of a difference between the two, but that normal higher snare serves as the standard snare on 5 and 13, but that deeper snare, as I mentioned, is that transition snare. It lets us know we're going to loop or if we're going to transition into a different section. So now let's take a look at the star of the chorus, which is the bass. The bass is behaving almost like the melody and the bass line at the same time. So it's still chill, but it's keeping our ear interested. Alright, so now let's actually look at this bass line because it's pretty interesting. We've got that root note, and then it jumps up to the fifth of the chord. So it jumps up a fifth, and then it only holds out for one step because it's cut off by the snare. As we've had ruling throughout the entire song, keeping that consistency with the bass lines. Going to that root note again on 7, and then we have it walking up the chord. You can hear it right there. So it's 5th, 7th, and then octave as we're walking through that chord. So it goes the root, 5th, 7th, octave. And that's why it sounds really nice, because it's interplaying with the chords around it and kind of walking in and around them. I don't remember the chords exactly for the song, technically, but what matters is finding the root and then finding the other intervals of the chord to kind of have it walking around and sounding nice. So now we're going to be taking a look at that second pattern of the chorus, where it's the same chord progression rhythms, but we're going to see the bass line's doing something a little bit different. It's walking down. But first, let's just start up top. So we got the root, and it's jumping up an octave this time instead of the fifth, because it adds a little bit more intrigue to the progression instead of just copying that other one with just the fifth jump. And then we have that root note that takes place. And then you can hear we've got a little more going on there, more walking. Let me find the notes for that real quick. Okay, there we go, perfect. So what we have going on here between these 4 notes, alright, you hear it right there. We have it going 7th, 5th, 3rd, and then back to the root, which keeps the bass walking around the chord, but it's doing it in a different fashion than the pattern beforehand. It's doing it almost in an opposite way of doing it, which leads us well into that third final pattern of the chord progression, where we're getting a lot more brightness from the bass as it's going higher up its neck, I guess, if you want to call it. And if we remember earlier, I talked about this final chord actually not being technically in the same key. It's modulating. So in order to play this bass line, we're going to have to change the sample pitch, which means that we're going to change the root note of the scale. But it's the same scale, we're just changing that because the chord is out of key and we just want to have it all sounding tight and good together. And you can hear all of those bass notes are working around the chord. So if we look at it, we've got that standard octave jump in that first note, and then it's really walking around here. And you can tell it's all within the same chord. I just can't tell you exactly all the intervals because I did have to change the key technically. But still, it does sound pretty good. We have it walking up and walking back down, and it helps keep that relationship between all of the chords kind of similar because the bass is still interplaying with the intervals of each chord, keeping it consistent. Oh, something else I forgot to mention. This song is at 80 BPM, just kept it at the standard one for the PO-33 just to make it easy. And it has a little bit of swing on it. Oh, that's the wrong knob. Right knob's for tempo. You can hear, you can really crank that swing. It sounds awful, but you can do it. I usually like it around 505, 503, somewhere in there, just to add a little bit of that groove to it all that you need, especially with lo-fi, is kind of relies heavily on some swing. Because listen to it straight. It sounds almost like a rap beat when you play it straight. When it's lo-fi, you really need to add the swing or else you aren't going to get the effect that you desire. And that's going to do it for the chorus. Alright, so now it's on to the final section. I don't know if you want to call it the bridge or the outro. It's definitely different than the rest of the sections because it has a different chord progression. I think this is a pretty fun section. So let's start first and foremost with the chords for this section, because they are different, but they're the same chords that have been used throughout, just a change in progression. So you can see it goes 1, 13, 15. That's the groove, except for the final pattern, which is just on the 1 and just carries through. So that's the rhythm, but let's look at the order for the chords. So it goes that second chord, and it jumps up 3, 4, and back to the 2, and then something like that for the next section. But then it resolves with that chord that's technically out of the key in the same way. And so that helps let us know it's going to either loop back around or it can go to that other progression really smoothly, which is awesome. So it's a great way to change things up, but then also to keep some things familiar as it changes up the section, not making it too jarring for the listener. So now let's actually take a look at the drums for this section. So that's the groove. It's pretty similar to the chorus, but we hear there's something else different that's going on with it. We hear that we have the same alternating hi-hat shaker feel with that hi-hats going on vertical row 1 and 3, and then shakers on vertical rows 2 and 4. And we create that nice groove. But if we look at step 8 and step 10, we have those snare hits that are taking place, those fatter, deeper snares that kind of add that alternating groove. So if you're ever looking for that feel, you go 5, 8, 10, 13 for that kind of amen break or amen break type of feel that everyone does, or for drum and bass even. But it also works for lo-fi very well. And you can hear on that final pattern, I have those snares hitting once again at the very end, those fatter snares, which we've trained our ear at this point to know that if they're at the end of a pattern, it's going to either transition or loop. So it helps the listener know where we're headed next. But if we were following the rules that I had already established with the hi-hats on 1 and 3 and then the shakers on 2 and 4, then these snare hits should be different. But I accidentally punched them in as the same snare. Can you tell? I sure can't, and I obviously didn't when I was punching it in. Still sounds good to me. So now let's take a look at the bass line. Bass line's pretty simple because the chords are really what are supposed to stand out for this section as they've changed. The bass is kind of staying as the root. It's following root notes and being the foundation to this section. But the bass is still following that rule where it's getting cut off by that snare. We have it getting cut off at the 5th step as normal, and then it has it following the kick rhythm for the section as well. So what this means is it's got to either, the bass line for me always has a fundamental rule. It either is following the chords or it's going to be following the kick. In this case, we have it doing both, where it's following the chords or it's following the kick, and it just keeps it tight. Let me point out the rhythm for you. So the bass is similar for every single pattern for this section. It's following the chords and the kick. Something that's another great bass tip is the octave jump, as you're just hearing me do right here. It's a classic in bass. It kind of adds some intrigue. You hear it in even rap and stuff with 808s, but also if you're using a normal bass that you've recorded, acoustic bass I should say, it really does add a lot of intrigue instead of just keeping it just on the roots. Because if you're going to be on the root of the chord, might as well have some octave jumps in there to keep it interesting. I hope you all have enjoyed this tutorial and it's really helped you out. If it has, be sure to like and subscribe. I also have my other videos here, other playlists of tutorials or just pocket operator videos I've made in general. Be sure to check the description below for the samples for this video or ask any questions in the comments. I'd be happy to answer them. That being said, I hope you all have a great day.